mine who I taught sports journalism at Butler for a few semesters, a high school student, and an 8th grader. And I'm grateful to all of them. You know, with all the Butler breaking news in recent days, I realized in the last, this is just probably in the last month, I have had breaking news happen while I was waking up one morning, twice while I was driving, and I don't drive that much. Once when I was about to drive, another time when I was buying shoes at a running shoe store in Illinois, and another time when I was covering World Swim Trials remotely last night from watching the Olympic Channel. So you're just the nature of sports journalism has changed so much, and so has covering college basketball. And I think it. And I wanted to talk about Butler, but I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a timeline of some of the ups and downs that Butler basketball has had in the 2000s, because in many ways, you know, Thad Matta kind of brings Butler back to full circle. Just coincidentally, his 1 year as the head coach was in 2001, and that was the first year I began covering Butler. So that was very, very serendipitous, because I had no idea what I'd be getting into. I did not realize I'd be spending 1,500 hours over the course of 3 consecutive summers writing 3 books about Butler basketball. That was definitely not on my radar. But I take you back to, I think, also to show that even though Butler has been so good for so long, things have always been like a little bit fragile, as it is in almost all sports at all schools. You know, you go back to 2001 when Thad was first there. You know, Butler started off the season 6-4. They lost to a great Arizona team in Tucson in a tournament. Well, they ended up going through. They won what was in the Midwestern Collegiate Conference tournament. And then I kind of hate to bring this up for a Wake Forest grad, Graham, but probably the most ridiculous half of basketball I will see or ever will see in the NCAA tournament. Here's Butler, had not won an NCAA tournament game in 39 years. And I'm keeping the play-by-play of the game. I'm looking up at the scoreboard thinking, man, I think I've got this right. Anyway, the halftime score was Butler 43 and Wake Forest 10. To the point that Thad Matta kept turning around to a young director of basketball operations named Brad Stevens and kept asking him, "Is that score right? Is that score right?" And it was right, and Butler did win, and then subsequently in the next round actually lost to that Arizona team that beaten them. And I would argue that team had like 3 future NBA stars. Jason Gardner, that might have been the best team Butler has ever played in the NCAA tournament, and that was a mistake. By seeding, Butler should not have been paired in a rematch that round, and that was the first probably several times, whether just coincidentally or whatever, Butler was really kind of maltreated by the NCAA. 2002, Todd Licklater came on. That team was so good. There are some people still think that might have been Butler's first Final Four team, but they were omitted from the NCAA tournament in 2002. In 2022, that never would have happened. The field has expanded. That Butler team was ranked 28th in a prominent computer ranking by Ken Pomeroy. There is no earthly way that team would have been omitted, but they were that year. So that was a huge disappointment. They lose what I consider 2 of the greatest players in the history of their school, Thomas Jackson and Rylan Hangey, 2 of the all-time greats. I'm thinking, well, 2003 is not going to be too hot. Well, 2003, Butler goes to the Sweet 16 behind Darnell Archie's amazing shooting performance against Louisville, and then they ended up losing in the to Albany, New York regional to Kelvin Sampson, and I think people around here probably know quite a bit about Kelvin Sampson. 2004, Butler takes a dip. 2005, and I would get all these emails and complaints through the year. Oh man, Butler's so bad this year. People do not remember watching that 2005 Butler team, which was quite poor. And 2006, they're going through halfway through the season. It wasn't looking much better. Butler was 9-8 at one point and had just lost at Youngstown State. Now keep that Youngstown State name in mind. But they pulled themselves together, played extremely well the rest of the way. They did lose in the league championship game, but Brandon Crone, who was a senior on that team, junior on that team, maintained, and I agree, that propelled Butler into maybe what really pushed Butler ahead was the 07 team. That team, I think, won at Tulane by about 40 points in his first game, and consecutively in the called the NIT season tip-off, consecutively underdogs in all 4 games defeated Notre Dame and Indiana and Indianapolis, then went to New York and defeated Tennessee and Bruce Pearl and Gonzaga. That was sort of Final Four-ish. That team rose high in the rankings, got a very good seed, and I think you can direct a lot of the credit for that team, and you'll see why later. You talk a lot about today's transfer portal. 2 transfers, Mike Green and Pete Campbell, probably transformed the Butler basketball program, and I would even argue probably that those two players arriving on campus probably even ripples all the way into 2022, because it kind of gave Butler much more of a glimpse of what it could do. Then 2008, the team was probably even better. Got a poor seed, lost to Tennessee and Bruce Pearl in the second round of the NCAA tournament. That was an awfully good team. That team might have been good enough to go to the Final Four. They had 5 or 6. This is even before you get a COVID bonus year. 5 or 6 players. I mean, the guys are almost as old as Brad Stevens was their coach. He was 30, and he looked like, oh, he must be like the 9th man on the roster or something. But he was the coach that year, and he's always said he's forever grateful for those older veteran players kind of buying in and allowing him to do well. So at that point, all those guys left simultaneously, so that's when Butler should have taken another dip. And apart from that Wake Forest game I mentioned, to me the most astounding thing that I've seen Butler do during the time I've covered the team is they lost almost all their guys. They ended up the next year starting 3 freshmen. They're picked 6th in the Horizon League. I think, well, that's fair. So it would be really pompous to think that Butler's freshmen would be better than everyone else's seniors. Well, they were better than everyone else's seniors, because those freshmen included Gordon Hayward and Shelvin Mack and Ronald Norred. And Butler started that season 19-1, which I still reflect back, and that to me that was just remarkable. And among the teams they beat were Davidson and Steph Curry. Steph Curry was really impaired by an ankle injury that day, but also he was shadowed relentlessly by Ronald Norred, to the point that they brought Ronald into the media room for an interview after the game, and he was so exhausted, I think he just kind of wobbled his way in from chasing Steph Curry around the entire time. And then, of course, that prefaced the back-to-back Final Four runs. I think in hindsight, I think you could see the 2010 team. I mean, as just storybook as it all was, they come back to Indianapolis, they win the games in Salt Lake City. that was a good team. That was a legit good team. Had 2 future NBA players, sort of an iconic college player in Matt Howard. Ronald Nord was twice a league player of the year. Willie Beasley has the most wins of any player in Butler history. That was a really good team. As it turns out, Danny Ainge of the Celtics wasn't scouting the team, but he was scouting the coach. The next year was the extreme improbability, because remember I mentioned that Youngstown State, like the Butler kind of lost at Youngstown State, and that's like, I don't know, that's like losing to a Division III school or something. They lost a game at Youngstown State, and I was at that game, and Butler really didn't play that poorly until like the last 3 minutes. Things fell apart. They're 6-5 in the conference, I think 13-8 overall. I'm thinking, oh gosh, Matt Howard is going to finish his career playing in the NIT. That's really too bad after everything they'd been through, and they still had Shelvin Mack, but Gordon Hayward had gone pro early. So I'm thinking, well, this boat just kind of taken on water and is going to sink. And I remember interviewing some of the guys after the game, and Brad Stevens was like very generous with, like, you could interview whoever you wanted to at any time. I think he thought that was part of the students' growth process. And I asked Zach Hahn, left-handed guard, shooting guard, so what are you guys going to do now? He just said, win every game. They, what do you mean? We just have to win every game now. Okay, Zach, you say so. So they won every game at that point. They ripped through the rest of the Horizon League to tie. They won the league tournament. They win 2 games in Washington, D.C., and I still remember hanging around a bunch of sports writers. And you may remember, the one game was, they played Old Dominion, won on a last-second layup by Matt Howard. They beat Pittsburgh in the most improbable finish anyone will ever see, because I knew Butler had won, I knew Butler had lost, and then Butler did win because of a Shelvin Mack inappropriately fouled a guy at the end. The guy missed a second free throw. Then even more inappropriately, a Pittsburgh player fouled Matt Howard. He made the winning free throw. Anyway, Butler's on to the Sweet 16. I remember hanging around a bunch of sports writers, and they're looking at the teams in the Southeast Regional, and they all look at each other and go, Butler could win that regional. And I thought, yeah, maybe. They blew out Wisconsin their next game, playing Florida, another chance to go to the Sweet 16. And Florida had been kind of Butler's nemesis. Florida had beaten Butler in 2000 in the last game Barry Collier ever coached. Florida's back-to-back national champion had eliminated Butler in 2007. Okay, this is the chance finally to beat Billy Donovan in Florida. Butler's down by 11 points late in the game, and I remember that specifically because I went back watching the game in order to help me write the updated version of Underdogs. And I'm watching the game and I'm going, I know the outcome of this game, but how did Butler win this game? I mean, there's not a chance. Well, there was a chance. Butler did come back and won that game, and then defeated Shaka Smart and VCU, and then just could not make a shot in the forgettable UConn game. But all that point of being is, I went back to Ken Pomeroy. He does those rankings, and I said, well, because he compiles these statistical analyses, I said, okay, how do you figure out, the chances? Butler was like, this much of a chance to win, to make the championship game in this year, this much of a chance. What were like the odds of doing that 2 years in a row? And the odds of a team with Butler's resume reaching back-to-back national championship games was 333,333 to 1. Which is one of the reasons I think it's very hard for people to comprehend Butler's story, because it was a sort of an ongoing underdog story. We had the Miracle on Ice in 1980. We've had some big upsets. You've seen football, you've seen basketball games. We see things at the Olympics. But I guarantee you, in none of those instances were the odds 333,333 to 1. So I still maintain that Butler's achievement of back-to-back Final Fours is the greatest underdog achievement in the history of American sports. I can't speak to worldwide, but I just think the whole thing is just remarkable. But after the back-to-back Final Fours, Butler next year, they're in something called the College Basketball Invitational. As Brad Stevens famously told me once, everything is very, very fragile. So Butler even had trouble recruiting off the back-to-back Final runs. I don't know if people didn't believe it. And the next year, Butler would have been just as bad, but a transfer named Rodney Clark came in and kind of revived the team. But I think it's worth noting that if as good a coach as Brad Stevens, and I still think he's probably the best living coach in the sport right now, even though he's a general manager. Even as good coach as good as Brad Stevens, coming off 2 national championship games, his last 2 teams at Butler, if not for the Rodney Clark transfer, would have been extremely mediocre and not very good at all. And his last recruiting class at Butler was really terrible. Brandon Miller came in, as you know, coached 1 year. At one time, Butler finished 4-14 in the league, but at one time it was 2-14. That team was awful. Fortunately, Chris Holton was there to be promoted to coach when Miller took medical leave and never came back. And I think in many respects, Holtman might have made Butler's transition to the Big East look easier than it really was. What I call, and I've said, and maybe finally caught up to Butler in recent years, I do think being in the Big East is going to be an ongoing strain for Butler. Butler can win in the Big East, you can do it, and interestingly, the Big East itself sort of has a legacy. If you can get a really good coach, a sharp coach, you can do historic things like Rick Pitino did at Providence. He took that nondescript program to a Final Four. P.J. Carlissimo was hired at Seton Hall, he says, because no one else wanted the job. And he took Seton Hall to a national championship game, another Big East team. So in a way, it's sort of interesting that Butler has landed on Thad Matta, who, if he does pretty well at Butler, has, to me, a legit chance of being in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. His resume is amazing. But, and of course, he succeeds Laval Jordan, who his best team was 2020. That team didn't get play in the tournament because of the pandemic. Last 2 teams were good. Butler's made the change, and of course, everybody at Butler has high hopes for Thad Matta. What I think has been interesting about the Matta hire is that it's almost like it was completely inevitable yet totally shocking, because people weren't really sure if his health would allow him to do it. He has something called drop foot from a failed back surgery, and I'd say to his credit, at his introductory, it wasn't a news conference, but his presentation at Hinkle when he was introduced, he said, "Hey, I've got, my foot doesn't work, I'm not dead." Because the viciousness of recruiting was such that, he said, people, other coaches on that recruiting trail would say, "Well, you can't go to Ohio State because Thad Matta's going to die." Well, that's a little tough to recruit against, I'd say. But to suggest it's not as cutthroat as that out there would just be naive. Which kind of brings us into modern college basketball. Thad is going to have to, as Mike Woodson is doing at Indiana, as Matt Painter is doing at Purdue, he is having to deal with things that nobody has ever had to deal with. And one of those things is the transfer portal, which I think now there's like around 1,500 players' names in the transfer portal. And just for shorthand, that means anyone can transfer at any time to any school with not waiting out any eligibility. And I think while this may be okay for the student athlete, it's shown to have a lot of unintended consequences. Recently, the LSU basketball team, which fired its cheating coach and then had players scatter, at one time a few weeks ago, they had 0 players on the team. Everyone had either declared to go pro or they were in the transfer portal. That is really difficult to manage if you have that, if you have 0 players on your roster. And I know Thad Mott will probably get a lot of credit for whoever transfers he brings in, but to me so far, his 2 greatest achievements have been, one, getting a really good coaching staff. Mike Pegues, Kevin Kuwick, who I remember from, he was on 1 year on Stevens' staff, I think it was 2009, and retaining David Ragland. And in turn, David Ragland allowed Butler to retain Connor Turnbull, 6'10" prospect out of Missouri, who was the only high school kid they signed. He wasn't sure he was going to stick with Butler and did. And he also recruited Simas Lukosius out of Lithuania. So out of the 10 players that Butler was going to have on the team next year, 9 are coming back. Really, in today's world, you have to recruit your own players every year too. The volatility is much greater than it is for professional sports. Because for professional sports, the players are under contract. You have to, even if you're 4 or 5 year contract, not every player is a free agent every year. Well, that's what college coaches are dealing with now. And Butler last night, picked up another transfer in Jalen Thomas, a 6'10" player who played at Georgia State. And then earlier they had a transfer from Akron, whose name is Ali, which is interesting, I guess, alliteration or I don't know. There's got to be an interesting backstory to his family that I'll try to write about at some point. But he was a second-team All-Mid-American Conference player at Akron. And he's from the state. He played at East Noble High School in northern Indiana. So from all accounts, those would be 2 really good additions to Butler's team. But again, all these coaches, while they're scanning the transfer portal for somebody who's good or for who might fit, they're also trying to keep a hold of their own guys. And when I think about next year's Butler team or anybody's team, I sometimes wonder if the outcome of next season will matter a lot more by who you retain on your team than who the new people are. We have seen some instances in this last season. I think Iowa State had a bunch of transfers and thrived. Texas Tech did. Wake Forest rebuilt its program with transfers. So it is doable. But as we've seen in this sport of basketball, just putting a bunch of really good players together, I'm talking to you, LA Lakers, I'm talking to you, Brooklyn Nets, who had as many playoff victories this season as the Indiana Pacers. That is, they had zero playoff victories for the Brooklyn Nets and Los Angeles Lakers, and they seemingly had assembled all-star teams. So this sport is about recruiting. It's always been about recruiting, but even more, I think, is finding the right fit. And over the decades, Butler has been really good at that. And there's no reason to think that Thad Matta wouldn't be either, because you really think of some of the coaches who have left, that Butler cocoon and gone on and done well elsewhere. Thad Matta has done that, whereas a lot of other coaches haven't. Todd Licklider, after that 07 season, went to Iowa. I think was fired after 3 years. Their Evansville team now, he's head coach there. That team is really awful, and they're trying to resurrect themselves. Barry Collier went to Nebraska, and so-so, although Nebraska's been a tough place to coach college basketball for just about anybody. LaValle knows he probably embodies the Butler way probably as much as anybody who's been in that chair, and he has had back-to-back losing seasons and was ousted. So it is not that easy, even if you have the best talent. And I think in many respects, no matter who the coach at Butler was going to be this next year, whether it was going to be LaValle Jordan or Thad Matta, the plan was going to be the same. So I think Butler has been on track with that you retain the young talent, which Butler has done, and to scour the transfer portal, which Butler is doing, and they're still hopeful of adding some more players. I do have to shake my head when I see other sports writers assemble like preseason top 25s in this sport now. I don't know how you could do it. Who's going to be on the team? That's almost like, well, who's going to be the top 25 in the 2036 season? Well, I mean, are some of those guys even born yet? We don't know. It's hard to know year to year who that's going to be. Now, North Carolina may end up being preseason number one because I see almost all their guys are coming back. But the one thing I haven't addressed with the new, besides the transfer portal, the name, image, and likeness is an enormous challenge. It will be for Butler, but it'll be for everybody. And you've seen that Lawrence Central's Nigel Pack, who is a good player at Kansas State, but Kansas State was not very good. Got a 2-year, $800,000 deal to represent some company, and then he signed with Miami for Florida. I still think that's kind of going to be an outlier. But I know at the University of Texas, they have promised every scholarship athlete there, some organization, everybody gets $5,500, whether you're on the women's water polo team or you're the starting quarterback on the Texas football team, you get that much money. So we're still in the beginning to see what that's all like. I think even those in the sport have acknowledged that no one knows what's legal. Like right now, to me, the cynic in me wants to say that, okay, well, it's just legalized cheating now. If some guy in some Lexington, Kentucky car dealership wants to pay a basketball player $1 million to go, show up one time to shake people's hands, and they call that name, image, and likeness work, I guess that's okay. But I also kind of feel bad for the athletes. They really don't have the financial literacy to manage all this. They're trying to go to class, pass class, do weights, go to practice, travel, go to these games. How do they have time to master what we've seen professional athletes who squander all their money master? So I think there are so many unanswered questions with this name, image, and likeness business. The Big East, I think, is really well as a collection. It's in a way kind of an upstart league, even though it's been around a long time. I would argue and have argued that when the 7 Catholic schools broke away from the football schools, I would maintain that, yeah, Jay Wright and Villanova may have saved the Big East, but really who saved the Big East were Butler, Xavier, and Creighton, because all 3 of those schools have done very well, gone to multiple NCAA tournaments, kind of kept the Big East what it was, to the point that I think this last Big East tournament, coming out of the pandemic, was the first one in which every session was sold out at New York's Madison Square Garden. I mean, the ACC's tried to get into the Garden, the Big Ten had a tournament in the Garden with a week early, but if you're head of that umbrella organization managing Madison Square Garden, do you want to blow everything up to placate these leagues who want to encroach on the Big East territory? I think it's been shown that retaining that Big East name and that's a big deal. Brand name is a big deal, but also keeping that tournament in Madison Square Garden has been extremely important to the Big East and consequently to Butler. And Butler's actually won, I think each of the last 3 Big East tournaments has won at least one game in the Big East tournament after not winning any for like the first 2 years in the league, including a overtime upset of Xavier, which effectively eliminated Xavier from the NCAA tournament field this year. But the name image, I was talking about the Big East. So I think as I got to thinking about what's next for Butler and these schools doing NIL, and Butler or Big East has a commissioner, Val Ackerman, who I think is really sharp. I mean, like she always does the right thing. She's got her you know, the schools respect her. Anyway, she knows what she's doing. She's a basketball person. I would think maybe the smartest thing for the Big East to do is be kind of almost have like an NIL committee to kind of figure out how all this stuff would, so maybe all the Big East schools could do something similar, so they wouldn't all, you know, trying to be cannibalizing each other over who gets what. But anyway, I would trust Commissioner Ackerman to figure something out on that. But can you imagine? I mean, most of these coaches, you know, they just like X's and O's. They like, you know, team building. They like interacting with the players, and now they have all these other things piled on top of them. They're supposed to be expert financial managers. You know, they're supposed to be able to navigate this, navigate that. I mean, it's no wonder in the last 13 months we've seen Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski and Jay Wright, you know, get out of the rat race, because, you know, until proven otherwise, you know, the rats are winning right now, and it's really tough to keep up with that. So I don't, anyone who says they know where NIL is going, I think is lying, because none of us really knows where that is going. But I do think it has a lot of unintended consequences. I'm probably a sports journalism deviant. Most of my colleagues were cheering, oh yeah, this is great, you know, now they can get paid, this is this, that is that. And I think it's showing us having a lot of bad consequences. And if cheating is legalized, I mean, how are we going to have competitive equity? And without, you know, and the NFL is, the reason the NFL is popular, besides the fact that Americans like violence, is that, you know, it's fairly equitable. You know, they keep it everything so that you have a chance. But if more and more schools realize that, well, you know, I don't have a you know, Warren Buffett on our alumni list. I mean, are we going to be able to compete with this? So I just, it remains to be seen on what the consequences of all this upheaval in college sports are. Mark Emmert, the president of it, is leaving soon, and that's good news for everybody, because he has just been overmatched in his role as a president. But it's not all his fault. I mean, the rules in place of the NCAA are in place there because the schools want them in place. But I don't know how anybody can manage all the upheaval there is now. I noticed Jack Swarbrick, who used to be an attorney here in town, now the athletic director at Notre Dame, thinks we won't even have an NCAA in a decade, and that it'll break up. And if that happens, it'll be like, you know, killing the goose that laid the golden egg, because March Madness depends on the whole nation participating. It depends on teams like Butler. It depends on teams like St. Peter's. It depends on teams like Loyola and George Mason and Wichita State, making the tournament interesting. And if that all disappears, I think that would really be a shame. I don't think it's inevitable that will disappear, but unless some of these changes, I think simply stated, have not been very well thought out. Not that you can always project ahead on unintended consequences, but I really don't think a lot of these changes have been well thought out, as evidenced by the fact that the schools themselves don't know what's legal with name, image, and likeness and what's not allowed. I mean, that's just crazy. You should have like some idea on that, but I actually don't think schools are really clear on what's allowable and what's not. Butler is not, you know, the most affluent school with 1 million alumni, but on the other hand, being small as Butler is, sometimes makes you a little bit more nimble. So Butler may be in a position to adjust to some of this stuff more ably than you know, some of the monolith schools. But it's concerning, and it's a lot. But boy, being a college basketball coach now is not what it was even 5 years ago when Thad Matta last coached at Ohio State. It's just craziness. I don't know where we are on the time. I was going to talk a little bit about the Olympics, but I want to leave time for questions. Two things about. I also cover Olympic sports. I just want to kind of remind people that the Olympic swimming trials in 2024 will be, short distance from here at Lucas Oil Stadium. The setup will be a lot like the courts of the Final Four, and that'll be like something that we've never seen. There's never been that many people undercover to watch a swim meet before. And then personally, I'm really looking forward to the first World Track and Field Championships ever held on U.S. soil, and that'll be in Eugene, Oregon, in July. And I think NBC and the Olympic Channel and the other NBC stations will have a lot of coverage there, and I think that'll be really exciting. And then we have, especially in watching the development of Cole Hocker, who was running high school here just 3 years ago, and now he's one of the top milers in the world, and to follow his progress. In all honesty, following his progress might be one of the most amazing things I've ever witnessed. Really right along with Butler's Final Four runs, and just something you just really didn't see coming. But I do want to leave some time for questions.
Well, mine's on the Olympics. So when are the Olympics, summer or winter, returning to the United States?
Los Angeles 2028. And it's probably a good thing because I think partly because of the pandemic, partly because I think of the time difference in Asia. We had back-to-back, had Summer Olympics in Tokyo, and then we had a Winter Olympics in Beijing, and then the timing was funky, and everybody's habits have changed so much during the pandemic. But I think much like '84, when really the LA Olympics kind of almost revived the Olympic movement in 1984, I think we may see something similar to that in 2028. The Olympics are in Paris in 2024, and I think that'll help too. I think a lot of U.S. viewers will enjoy that and tune in and watch Paris. And it's like a 5-hour time difference. It won't be quite as crazy in terms of watching live events. Yes.
We all knew about Mike Krzyzewski retiring, but I was really surprised about Jay Wright. I hadn't seen, and maybe just because I don't read all that much about sports, but being in the Big East, did you know? I mean,
no, that was very shocking. He just in his kind of farewell news conference, he said he just kind of felt like he was losing his edge, and he just didn't. I don't know. It was just a feeling. It reminded me a little bit when John Wooden retired at UCLA. I don't say it was. Well, the announcement was abrupt, but I don't know that he'd been thinking about it for a little while, but nobody really knew. And of course, Jay Wright's I thought he might coach 10 more years and coach into his 70s as Jim Boeheim and Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski all did. But more power to him if he wants to. And I can see why now. And he said it wasn't necessarily because of NIL or the transfer portal, but boy, who wants to deal with all that now? It's a young man's game. It looks like to me. Yes.
With NIL, can we still consider it amateur sports? And first question. And second, if they find that it has detrimental consequences, is there a way to put the genie back in the bottle in 3 to 5 years?
They might do some kind of I don't think they would do they probably can't do a cap. That's probably not lawful. But they might do well, this isn't really your name, image, and likeness. This deviates. This is just cash handouts from the Tuscaloosa sugar daddy. I don't know how they're going to police it. I mean, unfortunately, as we've seen from the FBI investigation, and Xavier hiring basically a basketball miscreant like Sean Miller, it's like it's kind of sad, but there is penalty in college basketball for losing, but there is none for cheating. And I don't know. Maybe the next NCAA leadership will be able to figure out something on that, but maybe something will happen. But the FBI investigation we thought would be earthquake to the sport, and not much has happened except a few assistant coaches have gotten into trouble. Yeah, Graham?
Yeah, so that dovetails into my question. I read a really good article in The Athletic yesterday about potential successors to Mark Emmert. I agree with you and your colleague Greg Doyle, who's totally ineffective. They went through a list of potential, some college presidents, Condoleezza Rice, others. What do you think is needed in terms of the qualifications for that person to succeed, Emmert, and do you have someone in mind?
I don't have anyone in mind. I think you kind of need, you can't, they would always kind of give up, say, well, the schools maybe, and they're not, it is not an authoritarian position, the president of the NCAA, but just like a lot of other positions, including president of the United States, you are a leader. You set an example. You can, in many ways, set the agenda. I think you'd need certainly it needs someone with specific, college sports experience, but someone who also is willing, who is a I don't know, visionary is the right word, but also someone who's fairly persuasive and can maybe cannot require schools to do certain things, but just kind of lead them into a kind of a mutually satisfactory end game. And I just don't know that we've had that right now. I think there is benefit in having divisions 1, 2, and 3 together, and maybe the big football conferences should have some autonomy for some of that. But the person is going to need to be strong, not a pushover, visionary, and have some college sports experience. You need all those things.
David Woods is my recommendation.
No, I just like to talk. I don't know if Condoleezza, but somebody like that would make sense. And there's probably some other people out there. Is it Andrew Luck's dad? I mean,
he was mentioned.
He's mentioned that too. Yeah, he'd be good. Would Gavitt want to leave his basketball roots? That's the other thing that Mike Krzyzewski, I think, advocated for. He thinks there should be almost like a separate commissioner for college basketball, and that makes a lot of sense to me too. I mean, we have really seen. I mean, I don't know. I even learned this in my daughter's elementary school with the principal. But as I've gotten older, I realize leadership is everything, and leadership is not making people, is not power for the sake of power. Leadership is kind of leading people to become, their best selves. Basically, to me, that's what the definition of leadership is, and it's very difficult to find, but certainly college sports needs it.
So real quickly, in March 21st, I was at a 3-day conference in Houston with a bunch of defense attorneys, commercial litigation, business litigation, and I will tell you, this is a hot topic with the sports. We had an hour and a half presentation on it. I think, and I may work with Trina on that, I think one of the people is local, and perhaps we could, and NCAA was involved, perhaps we could open something up to have them come here, because this has been debated about amateur athletes having a right to their image and being able to make money off of it in the legal profession for at least 5 years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a hot topic.
I guess if I were like advising a student athlete, the way I would do it, and actually I mentioned the miler Cole Hawker. I thought he might be able to get a $1 million offer to represent Nike shoes and continue to run for the University of Oregon. I still think he could have done that, and he is that valuable in that sport to Oregon. But to me, that would be the way to do it. So you don't have to do anything. The athletes do not have time to do anything more than they're doing. But if they can make money, just because their name is is Suni Lee or Graham Honecker or David Woods or something, okay, that's fine, but they don't have time to do anything extra to earn that kind of money. I'm not sure where it's all gonna go, and also, I think we'll find too that most athletes to most marketers, they're really not worth anything. The name on the front of the jersey, you know, the Purdue or the Butler, or the Indiana, that means a lot. But the names on the back of the jerseys, those change all the time. These aren't like professional athletes, and sometimes they're not there very long. So I guess it still kind of remains to be seen how valuable is the 8th guy in the Kentucky basketball rotation or the backup Alabama center in football worth really? I mean, if I were, I wouldn't pay him anything if I were an endorser. I mean, why would I? They don't bring me anything. So we'll kind of see kind of how it goes.
David, I want you to know that your articles is why I buy the Indianapolis Star.
Oh, well, that's very generous.
Tell your boss you were told that.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting year, and there's been a lot. I mean, it was kind of weird for me too, because I'd write a few analyses, and then a couple times this year my bosses acted, well, you know, what's your opinion on stuff? Well, I tend not to do that. That's not really the beat writer's job. No, we want you to this time. So I said, okay. I don't know if people like this or not. And I know Butler certainly didn't like some of the things that I wrote. But it was a very stressful season. It's a tough season, and you know, and I just hope for the best for everybody. I hope, you know, the team bounces back. I hope you know, I think LaVal Jordan's a capable coach. I hope he gets a good job elsewhere. But as of now, he and 2 of his assistants don't have coaching jobs. Now LaVal probably has in his contract such that he'll be fine. But you know, these coaching changeovers have, you know, real consequences with real people and real families, and it's you know, it's a tough business to be in. It really is. Thanks so much for your patience.
I very much appreciate this. Graham, I'm going to steal a piece of paper back from you. Thank you. All good. I just needed some sheets. So David, thank you again for spending so much time with us today. And I do want to know how you retain all of those stats and numbers and years, and that's truly impressive.
Well, it's the 1,500 hours of working on Butler basketball.
So you're saying it doesn't come easy. But David, as a token of our appreciation, a donation is being made in your name to the Indiana Youth Group. IYG creates safer spaces that foster community and provide programming that empowers LGBTQ+ youth and magnifies their voices. Thank you. Until next week, and we are back here again next week, meeting is adjourned.